Thank you all for inviting me to speak today. It's a privilege and a great honour to be here and join you all. I come to you from London, UK, where I was born and raised, and though an ocean divides Canada and the UK, the story that we share is not so different. In both Britain and in Canada, as well as across the US, Europe and around the world, the Tamil diaspora is a product of our history and a testament to all that we have endured. Today, as we mark Tamil Heritage Month, a hugely momentous occasion and one that is growing in significance globally, I want to reflect on that heritage and our history, where we came from, where we are now, and where we are going. Our story begins back on the island, Ceylon as it was once known, a place often referred to as the Pearl of the Indian Ocean. Like so many lands across the empire, its people were subjected to divide and rule tactics under Portuguese, Dutch and British colonial rule. When colonialism ended, power was concentrated in the hands of the Sinhalese. What followed is well documented. Decades of racist laws, deadly pogroms and systemic oppression. For us, the Tamil people, it was a gradual erasure of our rights, our freedoms and our very humanity. These events drove many of us off the island, including many in this room today. It scattered us across the world and planted the seeds of the diaspora. Those are the fires in which we were forged. We Tamils are often referred to as reluctant separatists. What that means is the demand for Tamilulam was not born out of a desire for division or an ethnically exclusive state. It was a call for liberation from oppression, for freedom and for equality. After decades of this repression, our people, who are sometimes divided by caste, regionalism and religion, were all remarkably united in this call. The stronghold that the toxic Sinhala Buddhist nationalism had, though, meant that there was a stubborn refusal of the Sri Lankan state to meet those calls. Non-violence was dismissed and peaceful protests were crushed. And so, like many oppressed peoples around the world and throughout history, the Tamil people turned to armed resistance. It's a lesson that's well worth remembering today. The war of liberation that followed was immense. It demanded massive sacrifice and took massive tolls. There were moments of peace and hope, such as 2002, when the de facto state of Tamilulam was functioning, and there were glimpses of a permanent political solution. But what followed next was devastation that was overwhelming, even in our own bloody history. The 2009 genocide at Mullainmukal was all-encompassing. The tactics of the Sri Lankan state were horrific, and it marked one of the greatest atrocities of the 21st century. It's a textbook case and remains so for other oppressive regimes. The offences were littered with abuses that have been the subjects of several reports and documentaries, much like the booklets that you've got on your tables today. The offensive had a rate of killing that was unmatched. Hundreds of deaths daily, homes obliterated, villages wiped out, and the armed movement was destroyed. Over 160,000 people remain unaccounted for to this day. There was a cold logic to this violence. The choices to declare no-fire zones and then bomb them, to execute those that surrendered, to rape Tamil men and women, these were all deliberate. The genocide was calculated to be as devastating as it possibly could, to punish Tamils and to send the world a message. It was designed to try and break the will of our people. 16 years ago, I, alongside hundreds of thousands of others, and I'm including many of you in the room here tonight, we were on the streets marching for a ceasefire. 16 years ago, we were screaming till our lungs were sore on the roadsides of capitals around the globe, just to get into the rooms of those that could influence our fate. Sometimes politicians would meet us out in the cold, give lofty speeches, and placate us with empty pledges. That was what we had hoped for. In London, we occupied Parliament Square for 72 days. In Ottawa, Parliament Hill saw its own continuous protest in April. In Paris, Oslo, Chennai, cities across the world. But the genocide continued regardless. I remember May 19th, 2009. I remember coming to Parliament Square and the sense of devastation that had enveloped us all, not just in London, not just in Ottawa, around the world. It was no longer a protest, it was a funeral. We weren't there to demonstrate, we were there to mourn. We weren't shouting, we were crying. That is where we were. The pain from that era can never be forgotten. The loss of some of our brightest minds and strongest hearts remains irreplaceable. Nothing can make up for that. The wounds that were inflicted on us were deep. Many around the world understandably walked away. I remember the defeatism that had taken over some of our people. Some feared what this may mean for future generations. Without an armed movement on the ground, would our voices still be heard? Would those in the second, third, or even fourth generation of the diaspora still feel the relevance of our struggle? Had the Sri Lankan state won? Was this our end? But look at where we are now. Look at where we are today. 16 years on from the genocide, when we'd suffered those inconsolable losses, could anyone have thought we would have ended up here? Mulalevaikul was not the end. It's not the end that the Sri Lankan government would be. Instead, it was just the beginning of another chapter in our history. Around the world, the Tamil struggle paused, but it did not stop. The Tamil diaspora simply rose, stronger and louder. Protests continued. The advocacy of grassroots organizations persevered, including tonight. And the demands for freedom, equality and liberation still rung loud. In this country alone, in Canada, there have been remarkable achievements post-genocide. In 2011, Canada elected its very first Tamil member of the House of Commons. She would go on to deliver a speech in Parliament about Maviranal. And I'm proud to say we've had more provincial and federal representatives of Tamil origin in the years that followed. And who knows, we may even have some more later this year. In 2021, Bill 104 was adopted into the statutes of Ontario, ensuring that education about the genocide continued. And in 2022, Canada's Parliament passed a landmark resolution, becoming the first in the world to recognise May 18th as Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day. And I'm proud to say that this country was the first to recognise January as Tamil Heritage Month. It's a pattern that was followed not just in the UK, but in Australia and others around the world, where similar efforts are being made. In the UK, last year we had our very first elected Tamil MP. And just a few weeks ago, I was inside number 10 Downing Street, where the British Prime Minister addressed a room of Tamils to praise their contribution to the country. Not just in the UK or Canada, in Palermo, Italy, and even in the US, where in the space of a year, 2 landmark resolutions have been introduced to US Congress. Look at the rooms we enter now. 16 years ago, we stood outside the halls of power, banging on the doors. Downing Street, Parliament, US Congress. Today, we are inside them. And it's not just in politics. Mulalevaikul did not inspire the fear that Colombo hoped. Our people did not shy away from being Ulam Tamil. Instead, it galvanised our youth further. In the UK, student societies were once Sri Lankan societies. They ditched what was clearly a hollow label and embraced being Tamil instead. In Canada, TSAs have gone from strength to strength. And alongside other student initiatives, they all commemorate events such as May 18th and November 27th. The struggle has not been forgotten by the younger generation. In other fields too, the Tamil people have excelled. We have professional athletes, we have talented artists, we have politicians and writers, we have businesses, doctors, engineers, lawyers, award-winning chefs, and so much more. We are a story of remarkable resilience, strength, and hope. Not only have the Tamil people survived, we have thrived. And so too is the politics of Tamil nationalism. Everywhere you look, you can see it. From the virtual spaces of social media to real-life events, there's a rejection of the enforced Sri Lankan label and a deeper embrace of what it means to be Ulam Tamil. The work of the Tamil Guardian is a small example. We're entirely led by volunteers, myself included. But our global team of young writers from the homeland and across the globe continue to receive millions of social media and website impressions every month. Our message resonates with many. This is true in the homeland too. Tamil nationalism still remains the dominant force in the Northeast. Some analysis of the recent presidential and parliamentary elections claim that it is now a spent force, but that is wrong. What the election showed was a growing frustration of the established Tamil politics of the last decade, a rejection of the institutions that have borne little fruit for Tamil people since 2009, and the hope in a new anti-establishment type of politics. Many of those who campaigned for the NPP did not challenge Tamil nationalism. Some even indulged in Tamil nationalism, using symbols and rhetoric of the liberation struggle. Indeed, if you want to see the unwavering force of Tamil nationalism in the Northeast, just look at the events that took place a few weeks after the election. A cyclone battered the Northeast. There was rain, floods, yet tens of thousands of people went out of their homes, some in boats on roads, to visit the cemeteries and the graves of fallen Tamil fighters, pick up the pieces of these destroyed and shattered tombstones, pay tribute to their sacrifice and the principles for which they fought. Tamil nationalism remains potent. This did not happen by accident. It was because the genocide was so horrific that it became seared into our national consciousness. But it's also the result of years of toiling work by activists across the globe. From the women who raise black flags every February the 4th instead of Sri Lankan flags, to the youth in capitals around the world who proudly claim the Tamilulam flag as their own. We have not been defeated. We are here. We are still standing. But where we go from here remains undetermined. Indeed, I'm speaking to you at a time when the world remains a very uncertain place. What lies next for our people? To that, we must look at the current situation in our homeland. For many on the island, life under Sri Lankan military occupation remains grim. The Sri Lankan armed forces on that tiny little island, the pearl of the Indian Ocean, are more than 5 times bigger than Canada's. They're almost double the size of Britain's armed forces. They are a suffocating presence. They're in schools, they're in temples, they're in churches. War criminals remain amongst them, and so too does the violence and instability that they bring. The Sri Lankan state, even this newly elected government, seems unmoved by calls for justice or for demilitarization. There is still torture, there are still arrests, illicit drug and alcohol use is climbing, and the iron fist of the Sri Lankan state continues to stifle local livelihoods. Our economy remains entirely at the mercy of a racist and centralized government in Colombo. And there remains no justice for the decades of atrocity that have taken place. People are still fleeing the island. That brings me to my second point, the diaspora. The diaspora, all of us in this room, we are a fluid body. There are people who arrived decades ago, and there are people who arrived last month. They are also part of us. I've already listed the many successes of our people, how we rose from the embers to rebuild ourselves. We are resilient, we are strong, and it's a strength that the Sri Lankan state recognizes and fears. Yet despite our successes, many within our community also continue to face a range of struggles. It is in fact precisely our success that puts us in danger of falling into the trappings of becoming a model minority. We must remember the challenges that we have endured on our journey, whether it's the trauma of genocide and occupation, immigration policies, racism, or simply the struggle of starting new lives in a new country. The stories of those that are rebuilding are part of ours too. Their trials and tribulations are part of ours too. We cannot leave them behind. This is where our strength in the diaspora lies. It's in uplifting each and every part of our community that we uplift our nation. Today, in our new and changing world, we must remember that more than ever before. We are living in increasingly turbulent times, the politics of the last few decades seemingly falling by the wayside. Our nation is now facing a unique set of circumstances. 15 years since the end of the armed movement, and with an ongoing military occupation, What options lie ahead of us? On the shores of Tamilulam, global powers such as India are increasing their footprints. What will our relationship be with the regional power across the Port Strait? What will our ties with Beijing, a global superpower, be? What will our relationship with the new White House look like? Our people, ever growing in our numbers and our successes, are sometimes being drawn back into caste, regional and religious divides of before. How do we respond? How will we shape the values of our young men and women growing up in every corner of the globe? Looking further, the horrific events of Sudan and Gaza have demonstrated what the Tamil people have known about the hypocrisies of international humanitarian law. Some lives have been deemed less worthy than others. What does our solidarity with these victims look like? New economic challenges are impacting on billions worldwide, including on the island and in the diaspora. Meanwhile, the ever-worsening climate catastrophe threatens every corner of this earth. Is there a way forwards? These are questions that many are grappling with. There are not always clear-cut answers. For the Tamil people, I suggest we look back to our past to find our future. We must look at where our struggle is rooted and be guided by those principles. Our movement was one of national liberation, but also deeply pragmatic. That is to say, simply engaging with New Delhi or Beijing or Washington isn't necessarily to be discouraged, but any engagement with global powers must foreground the safety of our people and the principles of our struggle. The struggle was constantly breaking the shackles of previous restraints. Liberation for all was paramount, not just from foreign domination and tyranny, but also from religious and gender discrimination. Equality for women was non-negotiable. Casteism was abhorred. Racism was condemned. We must put those in practice forcefully every single day, particularly when at a time when some of those divides are creeping back into Tamil society. Our struggle transcends all of those. In addition, protecting the soil on which we were born, the sea that raised us, the air that we breathe is key. The liberation movement knew that and actively worked on those issues. Where would any of us be without it? And when it comes to more global solidarity, I was heartened to see how fishermen in Mullaivaikal responded to a boat of Rohingya refugees who were stranded off the coast last month. Those fishermen who work off the beaches where the worst of the genocide took place, beaches that were repeatedly bombed with artillery, beaches that hold the bodies of thousands of murdered Tamils, reached out a hand of solidarity. They provided food, water, and helped bring those asylum seekers on shore. Those are the principles of our movement. This is what makes us a nation. This Tamil Heritage Month, I want to of course celebrate our successes. How far we've come is nothing short of remarkable. But I want to also celebrate those values. This is not about being conservative or being liberal. This goes beyond being red or blue, whether Canadian, American or British. It's about the principles that we, as Tamil people, as part of the Tamil nation, bound together by decades of fighting for our freedom, uphold. Guided by these principles, I believe we will find a way forward in these tumultuous times. The challenges that we are facing are new, but our approach to them can be drawn from the lessons of the past. These values are not just relics, they can be a blueprint for the future. Happy Tamil Heritage Month to all, and thank you again. Nandri.